I woke up with a severe headache, and my wife and our guests were laughing about my drinking. The morning light crept through the curtains, stabbing my throbbing skull like daggers. I sat up, groggy on the couch, still wearing last night's clothes, while muffled laughter drifted in from the kitchen. My wife, Linda, and our dinner guests, her best friend Rachel, and her husband Jake, were cracking jokes. Words like lightweight and can't handle his drinks floated over, accompanied by Linda's piercing cackle. "Morning, sleepyhead," Linda called, her tone thick with mockery. She leaned into the doorway with her coffee mug, looking far too cheerful for someone nursing a hangover. "You were out cold by 9. You should probably skip the whiskey next time." "Yeah, you missed the party," Jake chimed in, smirking. Their laughter grated on my nerves. Something felt off. Maybe it was the way Linda avoided my eyes, or the smug undertone in Jake's voice. My son, Ethan, shuffled in, his face pale and serious. "Dad," he whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "Come upstairs now." The urgency in his voice sobered me instantly. I followed him to his room, the faint echo of Linda's laughter trailing behind it. Ethan shut the door and grabbed a small stuffed bear from his shelf. "I hid a camera in here," he said, pulling out a tiny device. "Why?" I asked, confused. "I overheard some things last week. I didn't trust Mom." My heart sank. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" He didn't answer, just plugged the camera into his tablet and pressed play. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed Linda and Jake in the living room, our living room, after I'd stumbled off to bed. The sound of their laughter felt like nails on a chalkboard as they leaned into each other, whispering and touching in ways that left no room for doubt. At one point, Rachel walked in, glass in hand, and smirked at them. "You two better stop before he wakes up," she teased. But there wasn't an ounce of seriousness in her tone. My stomach churned. Ethan paused the video. "I didn't want to show you," he said softly, "but you need to know." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The betrayal, the audacity, the casual way they acted in my home. It was too much. Rage bubbled under the surface, threatening to erupt. "Don't tell anyone about this," I told Ethan, gripping his shoulder. My voice was steady, but inside, I was spiraling. "I'll handle it." As I walked back downstairs, the laughter from the kitchen seemed louder. Linda was refilling coffee mugs, her eyes sparkling with what I now recognized as smug satisfaction. Jake lounged in his chair, looking far too comfortable for a guest. I clenched my fists, my body vibrating with anger, but I forced myself to sit. I wasn't going to explode. Not yet. Not until I had a plan. "Feeling better?" Linda asked sweetly, sliding a plate of toast in front of me. "Much," I replied, my voice cold and measured. She didn't notice, orient, or maybe she didn't care. All I knew was her laughter wouldn't last much longer. That night, after everyone had gone home, I waited until Linda was asleep before retrieving the camera from Ethan's room. Watching the full video was like ripping open a wound, but I needed to know. Every whispered word, every stolen touch was a knife to my heart. "You think he suspects anything?" Linda's voice was low but audible. Jake laughed softly. "Please, Greg's clueless. He was out before we even started." The casual cruelty of their words made my blood boil. They didn't just betray me. They mocked me in my own home, with my son sleeping just down the hall. The next morning, I woke early, determined to take the first step in reclaiming control. While Linda was still asleep, I gathered her phone and plugged it into my laptop. She thought she was so clever, deleting texts and hiding her tracks, but she didn't count on my persistence. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. Dozens of messages between her and Jake, each one more damning than the last. They joked about me, planned their meetups, and even exchanged pictures. My stomach turned as I scrolled through the evidence, each message another brick in the wall of their betrayal. By the time Linda woke up, I was back at the table, sipping coffee and pretending to read the news. She came downstairs, her hair disheveled, and kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong. "Morning," she said, grabbing a cup of coffee. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't notice the tension in my voice, or if she did, she didn't care. She sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of what I knew. I watched her for a moment, wondering how she could be so calm, so indifferent. Did she feel any guilt? Now you can watch the second part by pressing share and more. I watched her for a moment, wondering how she could be so calm, so indifferent. Did she feel any guilt, any remorse? Or was she so wrapped up in her little game that she didn't care about the damage she was causing? "Linda," I said suddenly, my voice breaking the silence. She looked up, startled. Yeah, I stared at her, my heart pounding. "Do you ever think about how much we've been through all the years we've spent building this life together?" Her expression softened slightly. "Of course I do, Greg. Why would you ask that?" I studied her face, looking for any sign of sincerity, but all I saw was the same mask she'd been wearing for months. "Just curious," I said quietly, my mind already planning my next move. Linda had no idea what was coming, but I was done being the fool. The game was over. It was time to take control. The day wore on, dragging like molasses. Linda's bright demeanor grated on me, her sweet voice dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from believing you've completely gotten away with something. She moved around the house as though everything was normal, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my skin. I played along, smiled when I needed to, nodded at her jokes, and acted as if the walls of our marriage weren't crumbling. She had no clue I'd already copied her texts, saved the video, and documented everything, every word. Every lie was a thread unraveling her web of deceit. I didn't want to confront her yet. Confrontation would come later, when it mattered, when it would hit her the hardest. First, I needed to set the stage. That evening, I suggested a family barbecue. Linda hesitated at first, likely concerned about how Jake and Rachel might react after my sudden suggestion to visit the lake earlier. But her hesitation didn't last long. Linda loved playing the role of the perfect wife, and the idea of an impromptu gathering seemed to stroke her ego. "Sounds great," she said, her tone saccharine. "I'll text Rachel and Jake." "Perfect," I replied, smiling just enough to keep her comfortable. By the time our guests arrived, the backyard was lit with string lights, and the smell of grilling steak filled the air. Jake strutted in like he owned the place, his smirk igniting a deep, smoldering rage in me. Rachel trailed behind, balancing a bottle of wine, her expression as smug as ever. "You've outdone yourself, Greg," Jake said, slapping me on the shoulder. "The grill master at work." "Anything for good friends?" I said, my voice calm, betraying. "Nothing. Grab a drink. Make yourselves at home." Linda fluttered around, chatting and laughing, as if she hadn't just been exposed as the lead actress in this sordid drama. It was almost impressive how easily she could lie, not just to me, but to everyone around her. If I hadn't seen the video, I might have believed she was genuinely happy, but I had seen it. And tonight, her house of cards was going to collapse. As the night wore on, I let the conversation flow naturally, carefully steering it to see how far Linda and Jake would take their act. It was like watching a pair of dancers perform a routine they'd rehearsed 100 times. Every laugh, every touch was calculated, subtle enough to fly under most radars, but not mine. "Remember that trip to the mountains last year?" Rachel asked suddenly, her eyes flicking toward Linda. "That was a wild weekend." Linda froze for a split second before laughing. "Oh yeah, that was fun. You guys should have come, Greg." Her slip was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I filed it away, adding it to the growing list of evidence. She thought I was oblivious, thought I'd laugh it off, but I wasn't the same man she'd been fooling for months. I was playing a much bigger game now. When the night was winding down, I made my move. I stood up, raising my glass in a mock toast. "To good friends and honest company," I said, my voice steady, my eyes locking onto Linda's. Her smile faltered for a moment, confusion flickering across her face. "And to the little things that bring us closer," I added, pausing to let the words sink in like trust. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Linda's eyes darted toward him. Rachel leaned back, watching the scene unfold with thinly veiled amusement. "What's this about, Greg?" Linda asked, her tone tight. I smiled, setting my glass down deliberately. "It's about how lucky I am to have such good friends and a loving wife." The silence was deafening. Jake's hand twitched. Rachel's smirk widened. Linda's mask started to crack. "You've had a little too much to drink," Linda said, her voice sharper now. "Why don't we wrap this up?" "Oh, I'm stone cold sober," I replied, my tone calm. "But you're right, Linda. Wrap this up." I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the video Ethan had shown me. Then with a flick of my thumb, I cast it to the TV screen on the patio. The footage filled the air, unmistakable in its damning clarity. Linda shot to her feet, her face draining of color. "What the hell is this?" Jake's chair scraped against the concrete as he stood, his face ashen. Rachel's laughter cut through the tension like a blade. "Oh, this is rich," she said, shaking her head. "I knew you'd get caught eventually." Linda turned on her, her voice a venomous hiss. "Shut up, Rachel. You don't know what you're talking about." "I think we all know exactly what's happening," I said, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me, cheating on me, making a fool out of me in my own home. And you." I pointed at Jake, my voice dripping with contempt. "You're supposed to be my friend," Jake stammered, his face beet red. "Greg, I can explain." "I don't want your explanations," I snapped. "I want you out. Both of you." Linda's defiance flared. "You're being dramatic. It was just a stupid mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "No, Linda. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. This is betrayal." The tension boiled over. Jake made a move to leave, but I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. My voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. "You don't walk out of here until I'm done." Linda grabbed my arm, her voice desperate. "Now, Greg, let's talk about this privately." "Oh, we'll talk," I said, my eyes never leaving Jake's. "But not before everyone here knows exactly what kind of person you are." Linda's grip on my arm tightened as I stepped closer to Jake. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted between us. The cold, calculating fury in me had started to boil. But before I could say another word, Rachel clapped her hands slowly, the sound ringing out like sarcastic applause. "Well, well," she said, leaning back in her chair with an amused smirk. "This just got a lot more entertaining. What's the plan here, Greg? Are you gonna beat him to a pulp, or are you just hoping for a dramatic exit?" Her casual mockery ignited something primal in me, but I refused to let her bait me. "No, Rachel," I said. "This isn't about theatrics. This is about exposing the truth." Jake tried to push past me, his face flushed and sweaty. "I'm not sticking around for this circus." "Sit down," I growled, stepping into his path. He hesitated, his bravado crumbling under my glare, and reluctantly sank back into his chair. Linda's voice cracked as she attempted damage control. "Greg, please. This isn't helping anyone. You're just making a scene." "A scene?" I laughed bitterly. "Linda, you and Jake made a scene when you decided to betray me in my own home. Jake made a scene when you decided to betray me in my own home. I'm just leveling the playing field," he said. I turned my attention to Rachel, and you sitting there smug, like none of this affected you. What kind of friend watches this happen and says nothing? Rachel shrugged, her smirk unwavering. "Oh, I said plenty, just not to you." Linda's head whipped toward her. "Rachel, shut up." Rachel ignored her, focusing on me instead. "You think Linda's the only one who's been lying to you? You should ask yourself why your marriage was so easy to break in the first place." The words hit like a slap, but I refused to let her see my reaction. "Don't shift the blame, Rachel. This isn't about me. This is about their betrayal." Rachel tilted her head, her tone almost pitying. "Sure, Greg, keep telling yourself that." The air grew heavier, the tension unbearable. I stared at Linda, waiting for her to defend herself, to fight back, to do anything that resembled remorse. But she didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against the patio table, her expression defiant. "What do you want me to say?" she asked, her voice hard. "Yes, I cheated." "Yes," I lied. "But let's not pretend our marriage was perfect. You've been distant for years, Greg. Always working, always focused on Ethan, never on me. That's your excuse?" I asked, incredulous that I cared too much about providing for our family and raising our son. "No, Greg," she snapped. "It's that you didn't care enough about me." Her words stung, but they didn't justify what she'd done. "And that's why you turned to Jake, because I didn't shower you with attention?" Jake shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. "Look, man, I didn't mean for this to happen." "Shut up," I barked, cutting him off. "You don't get to speak, not after what you've done." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the distant chirp of crickets. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't finished yet. There was more to say, more to reveal. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a small envelope. "While I was preparing for this barbecue, I did a little digging," I said, my voice cold. "And guess what I found?" Linda's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I tossed the envelope onto the table. Jake and Rachel exchanged nervous glances as Linda reluctantly opened it. Her face paled as she pulled out the contents. Printouts of emails, text messages, and financial records. "You weren't just cheating on me, emotionally or physically," I said, my tone icy. You've been funneling money from our joint account into a private $1,000s over the past year. Care to explain? Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jake leaned forward, peering at the papers. What the hell is this, Linda? Don't act surprised. I snapped at him. This is your handiwork too? I found your name attached to some of those transactions. Looks like you weren't just screwing my wife, you were using her to fund your little ventures. Jake recoiled, his face a mixture of guilt and panic. I didn't know. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut steel. You knew exactly what you were doing. Linda finally found her voice, though it was shaky and defensive. I was going to pay it back. Pay it back? I repeated, my voice rising. With what? More lies? More stolen money? Rachel, who had been uncharacteristically silent, let out a low whistle. Wow, Linda, you're even worse than I thought. Linda turned on her, furious. Oh, shut up, Rachel. You're no saint. Don't act like you haven't been. Don't, Rachel interrupted, her voice suddenly cold. If you want to drag me down, you'd better be prepared to go down with me. The venom in her tone caught me off guard. Whatever secret she was hiding, it was clear Linda knew about it. But right now, I didn't care. My focus was on exposing every lie, every betrayal that had poisoned my life. I'm done, I said, standing tall. You're all toxic, and I'm not wasting another second on any of you. Linda stepped forward, desperation flashing in her eyes. Greg, wait. Save it, I snapped. You've already said enough. As I turned and walked away, the weight on my chest began to lift. The reckoning wasn't over, but I'd taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The rest would follow, and it would be just as ruthless. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Ethan stirring in the kitchen. I hadn't slept much, my mind replaying every detail of the night before. I was done being a victim. Linda, Jake, and even Rachel thought they could bury me in their deceit, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. It was time to flip the script. Ethan looked up from his cereal as I entered the room. You okay, Dad? He asked cautiously. I'm fine, I said, ruffling his hair. Better than fine, actually. I've got a plan. He nodded, his trust in me unwavering, and went back to eating. I poured myself a cup of coffee, already piecing together the next steps, Linda thought. Last night was the peak of the storm. She didn't realize it was just the opening act. Linda had left early that morning, claiming she needed space to think. She didn't say where she was going, and I didn't ask. It didn't matter. I wasn't planning to sit around waiting for her to spin another web of lies. First, I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Claire who had helped a friend of mine navigate his own messy divorce. She listened intently as I laid out everything, the affair, the stolen money, and the evidence I had. You've got a solid case, she said after a moment of silence. But if you want to come out on top, you'll need more than just proof. You'll need to control the narrative. What do you mean? I asked. You need to get ahead of this. Linda's going to play the victim card. She'll claim you neglected her, that the affair was a result of your failures as a husband. If you let her set the stage, you'll spend the entire divorce playing defense. Her words hit. Linda had always been good at twisting the truth, turning every argument into my fault. I couldn't let her do that now, not when so much was at stake. Okay, I said. What do you suggest? Claire outlined a plan, one that was bold and unconventional, but exactly what I needed. By the time we hung up, I felt a new sense of clarity. Linda had underestimated me. That was her first mistake. I spent the day gathering everything I could: financial records, text messages, videos, every shred of evidence that painted the full picture of her betrayal. But I didn't stop there. I also compiled proof of Jake's involvement in her schemes, as well as Rachel's complicity. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about an affair. It was a coordinated effort to manipulate and exploit me financially and emotionally. By evening, I was ready. I sent out a few carefully crafted emails to key people in our social circle: friends, family, even a few of Linda's colleagues. I didn't share the video or anything salacious. Instead, I framed it as a heartfelt message about the challenges I was facing and the difficult decisions ahead. It was enough to plant the seeds of doubt about Linda's version of events without coming across as vindictive. Then I reached out to Jake's wife and Emily. We weren't close, but I'd always liked her. She deserved to know the truth. When she answered my call, her voice was hesitant. Greg, is everything okay? Now you can watch the second part by pressing share and more. The truth hit when she answered my call. Her voice was hesitant. Greg, is everything okay? No, I said bluntly, but I think you deserve to know what's really been going on. By the next morning, the fallout had already begun. Linda stormed into the house, her face red with anger. "What the hell did you do, Greg?" she demanded, slamming the door behind her. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, calmly sipping my coffee. "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "Everyone's been calling me, asking questions, making accusations. You've been spreading lies about me." "Lies?" I raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to see the proof again? Or should I send it to everyone who hasn't called you yet?" Her eyes narrowed. "You think this is going to make you look like the good guy? You're pathetic." "Maybe," I said, standing up, "but at least I'm honest. Can you say the same?" Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening. I knew who it was before she even answered. Rachel. Their alliance was unraveling faster than I had anticipated. Trouble in paradise? I smirked. "Don't push me, Greg," she hissed, but the venom in her voice was laced with fear. She knew I had the upper hand now. Jake's reckoning later that day, I got a call from Emily. Her voice was shaking, but there was an edge of determination. "I confronted him," she said. "He admitted everything." "I'm sorry, Emily," I said sincerely. "You didn't deserve this. Neither did you," she replied. "But thank you for telling me. I'm filing for divorce." Hanging up, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. None of this was how I had envisioned my life, but at least I wasn't the only one fighting back. That evening, I held a family meeting with Ethan. I explained in terms he could understand what was happening and what would change. He was quiet for a long time before finally nodding. "I'm proud of you, Dad," he said softly, "for standing up for yourself." His words hit me harder than anything Linda had done. They reminded me why I was fighting, not just for myself, but for him. He deserved a father who wouldn't let anyone walk all over him. As the pieces fell into place, I felt a sense of closure beginning to form. Linda's lies had crumbled, Jake's smug facade was shattered, and Rachel's schemes were unraveling. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I was finally free. The trap. By the time the weekend rolled around, the dust was settling, but my battle wasn't over yet. Linda had gone eerily quiet, staying out late and avoiding me. I knew her silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. She was planning something, and I needed to be ready. Ethan was with a friend for the night, giving me time to think. I sat at the dining table, sifting through the evidence I had collected when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You don't know the full story. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street at 8 p.m. if you want answers." The cryptic text sent a shiver down my spine. Was this a trap or another twist in this nightmare? I hesitated for a moment before typing a reply. "Who is this?" No response. At 8 p.m. sharp, I entered the coffee shop. It was mostly empty except for a woman sitting in the corner booth, her face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. She looked up as I approached, and I froze. It was Emily, Jake's wife. "You sent the text?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from her. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee cup. "I didn't know if you'd come." "Why the secrecy?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Because I didn't want this to get back to Jake or Linda," she said, her voice trembling. "I found something, Greg, something that changes everything." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table. "I went through Jake's computer. After you called me, I thought I'd find more messages or photos, but I found this instead." I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. At first glance, they looked like business contracts, but as I skimmed through them, my blood ran cold. These weren't just contracts. They were agreements between Jake and Linda, detailing payouts, fake loans, and even plans to funnel money through my business accounts. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. "They've been planning this for years," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Jake told me it was just an affair, but this is fraud. They were using you, Greg, using both of us." My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. Each page painted a clearer picture of the scheme Linda and Jake had orchestrated. The affair wasn't just about lust or dissatisfaction. It was a cover for something far more sinister. Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake and Linda have been talking about leaving town. They plan to take the money and disappear. I think they were waiting for the right moment, the sting. With Claire's help, we set up a fake business deal to catch Jake and Linda in the act. A week later, the trap was sprung. They initiated transfers, leaving an undeniable digital trail. The authorities acted swiftly, originally arresting them both on charges of fraud and conspiracy. Closure, trust, once shattered, is hard to rebuild. Ethan and I worked through the aftermath together, focusing on rebuilding our lives. Looking back, the most painful part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how easily I had been fooled. But I learned something. Strength isn't about avoiding pain. It's about surviving it and coming out stronger on the other side. This concludes our story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and follow. Thank you for your support.